I never should have married you." The words came out of Rafe, Duke of Nashelt, in a temper in the middle of his own drawing-room, hurled across the hearthrug at his wife of 4 months as though they were a glove he meant to throw down, and he regretted them, entirely and instantly, in the precise moment they left his mouth. But a man cannot recall a spoken thing, and so he stood there, jaw tight, glaring at the maddening woman he had wed, and waited grimly for the tears or the fury or the wounded silence that any of his acquaintance would have offered up in reply. He got none of them. Beatrice, Duchess of Nashelt, looked up from the letter she had been reading, quite unhurried, and regarded her husband with an expression of mild and courteous interest, as though he had remarked upon the weather. "Good news," she said. "You no longer have to." The fire cracked. Somewhere in the house a clock ticked, and the Duke of Nashelt, who had entered the room armored for a quarrel and braced for an apology he did not intend to give, found himself, for the first time in his adult life, entirely without a reply. "I beg your pardon," he managed. "You said you never should have married me." Beatrice folded the letter along its crease with 2 neat motions and set it in her lap. "I'm agreeing with you. It seems a great pity to me, too, if it makes you as unhappy as all that. So allow me to relieve you of the difficulty." She rose, smooth and composed, and crossed to the small writing desk by the window and took out a fresh sheet of paper and drew the Standish toward her. "You are the Duke of Nashelt. You have more lawyers than most men have coats. There are separations, I am given to understand, that may be arranged quietly enough that neither party need suffer more than the ordinary quantity of gossip. I have a small independence from my grandmother, not large, but sufficient. I shall want no more than my own. You may keep the houses, the horses, the tenants, and the entire glittering apparatus of your consequence, which appears to bring you very little joy and me even less. Shall I write to Mr. Halliday, or will you?" She dipped the pen and looked up at him, pleasantly waiting. Rafe stared at her. He had married Beatrice Wren 4 months ago for reasons that had seemed excellent at the time, and now, in the light of this appalling composure, struck him as the reasons of a fool. She had been the sensible choice, well-born but not grand, handsome but not celebrated, possessed of a sharp tongue that he had, in the fatal weeks of their brief courtship, mistaken for the kind of cleverness a man might spar with pleasantly across 30 years of breakfasts. He had been feared and courted his whole life. He had wanted, obscurely, someone who would not tremble at him. He had got precisely that, and he had spent 4 months discovering that a wife who will not tremble at you is also a wife who will not defer to you, will not flatter you, will not be managed, and will answer your worst temper with a serenity that makes your worst temper look exactly as childish as it is. They quarreled, God, how they quarreled! About the household, about the tenants, about a book, about nothing. She had opinions on everything and the wit to defend them, and Rafe, who had never in his life been contradicted twice by the same person, found himself contradicted daily, and worse, found himself frequently in the wrong, which she pointed out with a dry precision that left him no dignified ground to stand on. He told himself he detested it. He told himself he had married a shrew. He had stormed into the drawing-room this evening after the latest of these skirmishes, something about a steward he had wished to dismiss, and she had, infuriatingly correctly, determined to have, for once, the last word. "I never should have married you. Good news, you no longer have to." And now she was sitting at his own writing desk with a pen in her hand, offering, with every appearance of relief, to set him free. "Put down the pen," Rafe said. "You do not wish to write to Mr. Halliday yourself. Very well, I shall." "Put down the pen, Beatrice." She set it down. She folded her hands. She waited with that same maddening, unruffled patience, and Rafe realized, with a sensation like missing a stair in the dark, that he had absolutely no idea what he wished to say next, only that the one thing he could not bear, the one outcome he had not for a single instant contemplated in 4 months of glorious warfare, was the one she had just offered him with such obliging calm, that she should go. He turned away from her to the fire, because he could not think while she watched him with those clear, amused, unsurprised eyes. The trouble was that she had called his bluff, and he had not known until this moment that it was a bluff. He had believed, storming in, that he meant it, that the marriage was a mistake, that the peace of his old life was worth more than the daily aggravation of hers. He was a man of settled habits, 40 save 2, who had run his own affairs unquestioned for 15 years, and Beatrice had walked into his ordered world and put a question mark after every certainty he owned, and he had told himself, again and again, through gritted teeth, that he could not abide it. And now she offered to take the question marks away and restore his certainties, and give him back the silent, deferential, uncontradicted life he claimed to wanton Rafe found the prospect of it opening before him like a grave. He thought of the 4 months, not the quarrels or not only the quarrels, but the whole of it. He thought of the first morning after the wedding, when he had come down braced for a shy and simpering bride and found her already at the breakfast table reading his newspaper, who had looked up and said, "Your leader writer is an ass. He has the whole of the corn question backward," and had then proceeded to explain correctly why, and he had argued with her for an hour over the coffee and had been, he realized now, happier in that hour than in any breakfast of the preceding decade. He thought of the evenings when they did not quarrel, when she read by the fire and he pretended to attend to his correspondence, and in truth watched the firelight on her bent head and the small frown she made at a difficult passage. He thought of the way she laughed, rarely and never on command, but when he surprised it out of her it was a real thing, warm and sudden, and he had caught himself, more than once, saying absurd things for the sole purpose of provoking it. He thought of how much he had come to look forward to being contradicted. He had mistaken the whole of it. He had called it aggravation because aggravation was a thing he understood and knew how to be angry about, and he had not let himself see that underneath the aggravation was something he had no vocabulary for at all. That for the first time in his life, he was married to a person who treated him as an equal to be met rather than a power to be placated, and that he had come, without once admitting it, to need it the way a man comes to need air he has stopped noticing. She would not tremble at him. That was the thing he had wanted in his cold, clever way when he chose her. He had got it, and it turned out that a woman who would not tremble at him was also a woman who would meet his worst with a calm that showed him himself, and correct his errors without cruelty, and offer him, when he behaved like a spoiled boy throwing gloves across a hearthrug, precisely the freedom he had demanded, because she had too much pride to hold a man who did not wish to be held. And he did wish to be held. He discovered it now, staring into the fire with an intensity that frightened him. He had said the cruelest thing in his considerable arsenal, and she had not wept or raged. She had simply, quietly begun to let him go, and the letting go had reached into his chest and closed around something he had not known was there. Behind him, mild as milk, Beatrice said, "You are a very long time at that fire, Rafe. Shall I ring for more coal, or have you merely lost the thread of our separation?" He almost laughed. That was the maddening, magnificent thing about her, that even now, offering to leave, she could not resist the small, dry needle of a joke. He turned around. He had known, if he were honest, from the very evening he proposed. That, too, had been a quarrel. He had met Miss Beatrice Wren at a dull card party given by a duller neighbor, seated beside her by an unimaginative hostess who had no notion she was pairing the most feared man in the county with its sharpest tongue, and had expected to endure an hour of the usual thing, the careful flattery, the nervous laughter, the small trembling deference that followed him into every room like a smell. Instead, the young woman on his left had watched him decline to play out of boredom and had said without preamble, "You think it beneath you. Cards. I can see it in your face. You believe a game of chance is a foolish way for a clever man to pass an evening." "I do," Rafe had admitted, surprised into honesty. "Then you have not understood the game," Beatrice had said, "which is not chance at all or only chance at the edges. It is memory and arithmetic and the reading of faces, and the nerve to wager on what you have deduced. It is, in short, precisely the set of skills by which you run your estates, and I am told run them well only compressed into an hour, and dressed up prettily so that people who despise thinking can be tricked into doing it. You do not find cards beneath you. You find them beneath your dignity, which is a different and much sillier thing. Sit down and let me teach you to lose gracefully. It will be an education." He had sat down. He had lost repeatedly, and not gracefully, and he had enjoyed himself more thoroughly than he had at any entertainment in a decade, and he had gone home that night and informed his astonished valet that he intended to marry Miss Wren, who was neither rich nor celebrated nor especially biddable, and who had just called his dignity silly to his face in front of a card table. The courtship had been brief and combative, and to both their surprises, entirely successful. He had told himself he was choosing sensibly, a woman of sense, of spirit, who would not bore him. He had not let himself examine why his heart lifted so absurdly whenever her carriage was announced, why he saved up observations through the week to try them out on her, why the prospect of 30 years of her contradiction filled him not with dread, but with a warmth he did not care to name. He had married her calling it a sound arrangement, and had spent 4 months in a state of increasing, baffled agitation as the sound arrangement declined to behave like one, as it kept insisting, through every quarrel, on being something far larger and more frightening, something that could not be managed or filed or kept at the safe distance of an arrangement, because it had roots in him now, and the roots went down past every wall he had spent a lifetime building. He had not known what to do with a feeling he could not command, and so, being a proud man and a frightened one, he had done the thing frightened proud men do. He had attacked the source of the fear. Every quarrel had been, underneath, an attempt to prove to himself that she was merely aggravating, merely a shrew, merely a mistake, so that he need not face the far more alarming truth that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he had no idea how to keep her. "I never should have married you" had been the last and worst of these attacks. It had been meant to push her far enough away that he might feel safe again. Instead, she had picked up a pen and offered to go, and the safety he thought he wanted had yawned open beneath him like a pit, and Rafe had understood, all at once and far too late for dignity, that he did not want to be safe. He wanted to be married to Beatrice Wren for the rest of his contentious, argumentative, gloriously unrestful life. "I have not lost the thread," Rafe said. "There is no thread. There will be no letter to Mr. Halliday. Put the paper away." Beatrice tilted her head. For the first time, the faintest crack showed in the serenity, not hurt, exactly, but a wariness, the look of a woman who has learned not to trust a reprieve until she sees the shape of it. "You said." "I know what I said. I said a stupid, cruel, false thing because you were right about the steward and I could not bear to be wrong, and I wished to wound you into silence so that I might feel, for one evening, like the master of my own house." He said it flatly, the way he did business, laying the whole ugly account on the table. "It did not work. You are not woundable in the way I intended, which I am beginning to understand is the best thing about you. So let us have the truth instead, since the cruelty has failed. I do not want a separation. The very thought of it has just now made me feel as though the floor has gone out of the room." She said nothing. She was watching him very closely now. "I married you," Rafe went on, "and found that once begun he could not stop, because I told myself I wanted a sensible wife who would not tremble at me. I have been trembled at my whole life. It is tiresome. But I lied to myself about my reasons, as it turns out, because a man who merely wanted a wife who would not tremble could have chosen a dozen placid women who happened to be brave. I did not want a brave, placid woman. I wanted you. I wanted the woman who told me my leader writer was an ass over the coffee on the first morning of our marriage, and was right, and did not care in the least that I was a duke while she said it. I have spent 4 months calling that aggravation because aggravation is a feeling I know how to have. I am forced to inform you reluctantly, and with very poor grace, that it was never aggravation. I have been falling in love with my own wife for 4 months, and quarreling with her the entire time, because I did not know how else to be near her without admitting it." The paper slipped from Beatrice's fingers to the desk. "That," she said after a moment, and her voice was not quite as steady as it had been, "is a great deal of feeling for a man who, 20 minutes ago, never should have married me." I contain multitudes, said Rafe, most of them contradictory, and all of them it emerges in love with you. It is very inconvenient. I had a perfectly comfortable, perfectly empty life, and you have ruined it, and I find I do not want it back. He crossed the room slowly, giving her every chance to freeze him with a word, and she did not. You called my bluff. You did it beautifully. You offered me exactly what I claimed to want, and in offering it you showed me that I had wanted the opposite all along and been too proud to say so. No one has ever done that to me. No one has ever dared. It is the single most dangerous thing anyone has done to me in my life, and I have never been so glad of anything. You are standing very close, Beatrice observed, for a man arranging a separation. The separation is cancelled. I told you. Write to Mr. Halliday if you like. Write to tell him his services are not required and that the Duke of Nasholt has been comprehensively outmaneuvered by his own Duchess and could not be happier about it. He stopped an arm's length from her. But I will not hold you against your will, Beatrice. That is the one thing I will not do, having just discovered how much I dread your going. I said a cruel thing. You answered it with a free woman's dignity, and I will not now take the freedom back by force of feeling. So I ask you plainly, and you may answer as plainly. Do you wish to go? If you do, if these 4 months have been to you only the aggravation I pretended they were to me, then I will let you go, and I will settle far more than your grandmother's independence on you, and I will not trouble you again. But if there is any part of you that has, God help you, come to want the maddening, arrogant, wrong-headed man you married as much as he has come to want you, then throw that paper in the fire and stay, and let us quarrel about the corn question for the next 40 years. Beatrice, Duchess of Nasholt, looked up at her husband for a long moment, and Rafe watched the serenity he had come to know so well waver at last and give way to something beneath it that he had never been permitted to see, for she too, it emerged, had been armoring herself, all these 4 months, against a man she had not dared believe would ever love her back. You wish to know, she said, and now her voice did tremble just slightly, whether I have come to want you. I shall tell you, since we are apparently telling the truth this evening, which is a novelty in this marriage, and I find I approve of it. She rose from the writing desk to stand before him, and though she was a head shorter, she did not give an inch of ground. I married you because you were the first man of my acquaintance who spoke to me as though I had a mind. Every other suitor I ever had wanted a pretty ornament who would agree with him, and I would rather have died a spinster than be an ornament, and very nearly did, being 23 and sharp-tongued and considered quite unmarriageable on both counts. And then a Duke of feared, brooding, impossible Duke argued with me for an entire evening about a matter of politics, and lost, and enjoyed losing, and I thought, there, that one. He will drive me to distraction, and he will never once bore me. And I would rather be driven to distraction by a man who sees me than adored to death by a man who does not. You have driven me a good deal further than distraction, Rafe said. I have tried, a watery flash of the dry humor. But I did not know, Rafe. I did not know if it was only that you wanted a wife who would not tremble, as you said, and whether once you had her you would find her merely useful, a well-trained horse that does not shy. I have spent 4 months quarreling with you and not daring to hope that the quarreling meant to you what it meant to me. And when you said you never should have married me, I thought, there it is then, he is tired of the horse that will not be broken, and I offered to go because I have too much pride to be endured, and because I would rather lose you cleanly than watch you regret me by inches over 40 years. Her composure broke entirely then, and it was not a collapse but a kind of surrender, the setting down of a burden she had carried since the wedding. So yes, since you ask so plainly, I shall answer plainly. I do not wish to go. I have never wished to go. I have wished, every single day, that you would only once say to me what you have just said, and I had given up hope of it, and so I learned to make jokes instead, because a joke is a safe place to keep a broken heart. Rafe reached past her and picked up the fresh sheet of paper from the desk, and held it a moment, and then, watching her face, fed it deliberately into the fire, where it caught and curled and was gone. There will be no letter, he said. There will be no separation, no Mr. Halliday, no clean losing. There will be a great many quarrels because we are neither of us capable of agreeing about anything, and I would not have it otherwise, for I have discovered I am only fully alive when you are telling me I am wrong. And there will be this, which I have wanted to do for 4 months and been too great a coward to attempt." He took her face in his hands, this woman who would not tremble at him, who had called his bluff and won, who had kept a broken heart inside a joke, and he kissed her at last in the fire-lit drawing-room, and felt her hands come up to fist in the front of his coat and hold on as though she had been waiting to hold on for a very long time. When at length they drew apart, Beatrice was flushed and unsteady, and for once in her life, entirely without a clever answer. "Well," she managed. "Yes," Rafe agreed gravely. "Precisely. I should have done that in month 1 and saved us both a very great deal of trouble." "You should have done that," Beatrice said, recovering, "instead of trying to dismiss my steward." "He is your steward now, is he? I believe he was my steward this morning." "He was always going to end up mine," she said. "You simply had not accepted it yet. You will find, Rafe, that a great many things in this house are going to end up mine now that we have settled the question of whether I am staying." "I am counting on it," said the Duke of Nasholt, and kissed his wife again. They did not go in to dinner that night for a long while. They sat instead in the fire-lit drawing-room, the burned scrap of paper still curling to ash on the coals, and they talked properly, for the first time in their marriage, without a quarrel dressed over the top of it, and Rafe discovered how much he had not known about the woman he had lived beside for 4 months. He learned that she had refused 4 offers before his, each from a comfortable man who would have kept her in comfort and silence, and that her family had despaired of her, and that she had made her peace with spinsterhood rather than marry into a life where her own opinions were an embarrassment to be trained out of her. He learned that she had accepted him not for his title. She cared nothing for the title and told him so, and he believed her, which no woman had ever made him do but because he was the first man who had argued with her as though the argument mattered, as though her being wrong or right were a thing worth establishing rather than humoring. "You frightened me only once," she confessed. "Not with your temper. Your temper is a great deal of noise and I stopped minding it inside a fortnight. You frightened me the night you said I never should have married you, because for one moment I believed you meant it, that you had discovered I was too much trouble and wished you had chosen a quiet ornament after all, and I could not bear to be tolerated, Rafe. I have watched women be tolerated their whole lives by husbands who married them for their portions or their faces and grew to find them tiresome. I would sooner be alone than tolerated, so I reached for the pen. It was the proudest and most frightened thing I have ever done." "It was the bravest," said Rafe, "and it saved us both. If you had wept, I should have felt vindicated in my cruelty and gone on being cruel, because a weeping wife confirms a man in his worst self. You did not weep. You handed me the door, and in the moment you handed it to me I understood I would rather burn every house I own than walk through it." He took her clever, capable hand that had reached for a pen instead of a handkerchief and held it against his chest. "I will never tolerate you, Beatrice. I have not the temperament for it. I intend to admire you and argue with you and be defeated by you at cards and politics and the management of stewards for the whole of my life, and never once, so long as I live, will I make the mistake of wishing you quieter than you are. You have my word. And unlike the corn question, that is a matter on which I do not intend ever to be moved." "We shall see," said Beatrice, but she was smiling, and her fingers had curled tight around his. And the joke this time was not a place to hide a broken heart, but simply the language they had made together, the language of 2 people who had found, against every expectation of their separate careful lives, that the truest kind of love is the kind that dares to tell you the truth and stays. It would be pleasant, and quite untrue, to report that the Duke and Duchess of Nasholt never quarreled again. They quarreled about the steward the very next morning, and about the corn question the morning after that, and about 100 things in the weeks that followed, with an energy that scandalized their more placid neighbors and delighted them both beyond measure. The difference, and it was the whole difference, the one that changed a marriage, was that the quarrels no longer had fear at the bottom of them. They were no longer skirmishes between two people afraid of what the other might mean. They were the sport of two people entirely sure of one another, arguing for the sheer pleasure of the match, each secretly gratified whenever the other scored a point, because it proved again what they now both knew, that neither had married a creature to be managed, and both had married an equal to be met. The county did not know what to make of them. It was whispered that the Duke of Nashold, that cold and formidable man, had married a shrew who contradicted him at his own table before guests, and that he permitted it, and more astonishing still appeared to relish it. Grand ladies came to dinner expecting to pity the Duchess and went home baffled, having watched a duke argue with his wife about a book for 20 minutes and then look at her, when she won the point, with an expression no one had ever seen on his face before, a kind of open, delighted pride, the look of a man who has staked everything on the one bet he could not lose. For Rafe had learned the thing that his whole cold, clever life had hidden from him. He had spent 40 years believing that to be loved was to be deferred to, agreed with, placated, and had been so thoroughly deferred to and placated that he had never once been truly seen. It had taken a sharp-tongued spinster of 23, who would not tremble and would not simper, and would not for one instant pretend he was right when he was wrong, to show him that being placated is not being loved, that the woman who tells you the truth to your face, who meets your temper with a joke and your cruelty with dignity and your worst self with a calm that shows you exactly how small you are being, is offering you something no flatterer ever could, the chance to be known entirely and wanted anyway. He never forgot the sight of her at the writing desk with the pen in her hand, offering to set him free. He kept it, privately, as the most important moment of his life, the moment he had been handed exactly what he claimed to want and had discovered in the handing that he wanted the opposite with his whole soul. He had said the cruelest thing he could contrive, and she had answered good news, you no longer have to, and the floor had gone out of the world, and he had found, in the falling, what he had been standing on all along without knowing it. Years later, when they were old and gray and still arguing about the corn question, which neither of them had ever conceded on principle, a young connection of the family, newly and nervously betrothed, asked the Duchess of Nashold for the secret of a long and happy marriage, having heard that hers, against all appearances of constant warfare, was reckoned the happiest in 3 counties. Beatrice considered the question with her usual dry care. "Marry someone who will call your bluff," she said at last. "Everyone will tell you to marry a person who agrees with you, who soothes you, who never makes you cross. It is bad advice. Agreement is very restful and very lonely. You may be soothed straight into a grave without ever once being met. No. Marry the person who will look you in the eye when you are being your very worst and decline to be frightened and offer you the door, and then when you cannot walk through it will throw the paper in the fire and stay to quarrel with you for the rest of your life. That is not the comfortable love. It is the true one." She glanced across the room at her husband, who was pretending to read and was, in fact, as he had been for 40 years, watching her. "I offered that man his freedom once on a sheet of good writing paper, and he burned it. I have never let him forget it, and I never shall. It is the finest thing he ever did." "I heard that," said Rafe from his chair. "I intended you to," said Beatrice. And the Duke of Nashold, who had once declared in a temper that he never should have married her, set down his book and crossed the room, and offered his old and difficult and beloved wife his arm, as he had done every evening for 40 years, ever since the night she had called his bluff and won them both a life worth quarreling through. "Shall we go in to dinner, Duchess?" he asked. "I have a great many things to disagree with you about, and I should like to begin at once." "I thought you would never ask," said Beatrice, and took his arm and went.